The Orient Kamasu has been on the market for a couple of years now, and amongst watch collectors and watch review channels here on YouTube, it has received a great deal of fanfare. So I finally decided to pick one up for myself and to see if the hype is real, or if this is ultimately just an Orient Ray with a 60% price increase. But before we get into that, let's quickly go over the features and the specifications of this Orient Kamasu. The Kamasu comes in with a case diameter of just a fraction under 42 millimeters, with a thickness of almost 13 millimeters. Its wingspan is about 46.5 millimeters from lug tip to lug tip, and the bracelet rides between the lugs at 22 millimeters. Overall, remarkably similar in size to the aforementioned Orient Ray 2, with just nominal differences in terms of the size and scale. The watch is powered by Orient's caliber F6922, an automatic self-winding movement with 22 joules, running at 21,600 vibrations per hour, with a 40-hour power reserve and an advertised accuracy range of -15 to +25 seconds per day. In practice, over the last couple of weeks of wearing and testing the watch, I find that it has been averaging out at about +10 seconds per day, or running fast, just a bit over 1 minute per week. The movement is also hand winding, so it's easy to get the power reserve up to maximum when the watch has been off the wrist for a while, and of course it has stop seconds hacking, allowing you to pause the movement and set the time to a known accurate time source. The movement also offers quick set for the day and date complication, such that getting the watch completely set up and running is really easy and convenient. The Kamasu has a price of about $240 to $280 US, but typically it can be purchased for $269. As previously mentioned, that's $100 more than the typical price of the Orient Ray 2, a very similar watch which can be found for about $169, sometimes even less. The watch and the bracelet are constructed of 316L stainless steel, and they have a mix of brushed and polish-finished surfaces. We do have a 120-click unidirectional elapsed time bezel, a screw-down crown, 200 meters of water resistance, and the dial is covered by a scratch-resistant sapphire crystal. The bracelet is in a 3-piece link style with nice U-shaped and pivoting, but hollow end links. The bracelet does start out at 22 millimeters at the watch head, and it tapers down slightly at the clasp to 20 millimeters. The flat surfaces are in a brushed finish with polished edges on the sides of the link, and the links are held together with just simple friction pins. The clasp is a dual-triggered deployant clasp with fold-over safety latch and features 4 points of micro-adjustment. The swing arm is high-polished steel, but it is thin, stamped steel swing arm blades. The screw-down caseback is laser-engraved with a dual dolphin logo, which looks nice, and it's honestly probably better suited to the design than having a display caseback, so I like that. Now the outer edge of the caseback is finished out with high mirrored polish. Moving on to the watch head, at just under 13 millimeters in depth, it doesn't feel too thick, but of course it does have a little bit of heft to it. The elapsed time bezel does have a fully graduated aluminum insert, and it has good action. It rotates smoothly, but like similarly priced Seiko watches, it does feel what I might describe as a little bit spongy. The clicks aren't firm and positive, but hey, I prefer that to a bezel action that is overly stiff. Now, the bezel edge texture is decent, but being highly polished on the edge, it is a little bit slick. I will say that this doesn't seem to interfere with operation under dry conditions, but I could imagine that it would cause difficulties when the watch is wet. The case finishing is good, with the brushed surfaces being smooth and the polished flanks having a nice aesthetic that is both typical for dive watches in general, and I'd say in matching in quality with other watches in this price range. The sapphire crystal and the dial beneath are what I'd consider the hallmark moments for this watch. The crystal is clean and clear, and it gives a good view of my favorite part of this watch, the dial. The dial itself has the Orient branding just below the 12 o'clock marker, and the day and date complication, framed with a nice metal surround, is located over at the 3 o'clock position of the dial. The stick markers and the 12 o'clock triangle all have a striking high-polished metal surround, and the markers as well as the handset are generously filled with glow-in-the-dark lume. Presumably Seiko Luma Bright, being a sister brand of Seiko, if I had to guess. Speaking of the handset, we have a broad arrow hour hand with a sword-style minutes hand and the seconds hand with a red arrow-tipped point. The hands are high-polished stainless steel, very legible, and in my opinion, really well done. The dial itself is in a glossy black, no texture or embellishments outside of the simple Orient branding and the water resistance rating on the lower half of the dial. And it may be considered a bit boring by some people, but these are exactly the type of dials that I personally like. Now on the wrist, the watch wears really nicely. My wrist is 3 6/4 inches in circumference and it wears quite well. I think you could comfortably pull this watch off on a range of wrist sizes down to 6.5 inches and all the way up to, and probably even approaching 8 inches. Now the watch does feel a little bit more substantial on the wrist than what I typically wear because I don't usually wear watches with a 22mm bracelet with very little taper. But with that being said, it does not feel too large and overall I do like the fit and feel. So that just about covers the watch's features and specifications, but the question is, what do I think about it? Does this watch have more pros than cons? Is it overhyped? And does the price increase feel justified when the Orient Ray 2 is so similar for 60% less? First, let me say that I am a big fan of the Ray. When I bought and reviewed that watch several years ago, I really loved it. At $150 to $175, the Ray might be the best affordable watch on the market over the last decade. And in some ways, this Orient Kamasu meets and it even exceeds the Ray in terms of quality, style, and value. The main upgrade on the Kamasu that makes it worth the extra money is pretty simply and most notably the sapphire crystal. Lots of people upgrade their Orient Ray with a sapphire crystal, and that can probably cost upwards of $100 if you have to buy the parts and pay a watchmaker to do the installation. Unfortunately, the Kamasu doesn't use an AR-coated sapphire crystal, and most people would install one with anti-reflective coating if they were going to bother to do an aftermarket upgrade. So in that regards, this is a little bit of a negative, but yeah, overall, the sapphire crystal is worth the price of admission. Another thing that I noticed about the Kamasu is that it has a better bezel action. The Ray 2 that I owned and reviewed in the past had a very, very stiff bezel. So I'm glad to see that Orient has worked that out on this model, and it makes a big difference in terms of usability. So I really appreciate that upgrade. The bracelet clasp on the Kamasu has 4 micro adjustment points instead of just 3 on the Orient Ray 2. And while this is a very small difference, I will say that to a point, more is generally better. So I'll give the Kamasu a win when we talk about the clasps as well. However, other than those few small details, there is otherwise extraordinarily little difference between this model and the Orient Ray 2. And there were actually a couple of disappointments on this watch. For example, it still uses hollow end links on the bracelet, and honestly, I'd like to have seen an upgrade to solid end links if the price is going to be 60% more. Also, on the bracelet, an upgrade to solid, machined steel swing arm blades is something that I'd have expected as well. In terms of style and aesthetic, I do prefer the dial and the hands of the Kamasu model, and while I can't say that they're quote-unquote better because this is purely subjective, I do like the look of this watch better than the Ray. That may or may not apply to you as well, but for my money, I do feel like this design looks better. One other subjective difference is the bracelet, and specifically on the bracelet, we're talking about the center links. On the Ray 2, the center link has a polished edge, giving it sort of an Omega Seamaster homage look. And it's a look that I do like, but I prefer the full brushed links found here on the Kamasu model. And again, your mileage may vary on that one, but I do like this style a little bit better. So, in closing, is the Orient Kamasu overhyped? Well, in so much that it's a really good watch in the affordable watch segment, I'd say no, it's absolutely not overhyped. It's one of the best watches under $300 that I've seen so far. But so too is the Orient Ray, one of the best watches for its price that you can get your hands on. So if you don't really care about the sapphire crystal or the aesthetic differences, you could probably just save a bunch of money and buy a Ray. However, either way, you really can't go wrong. Alright guys, thanks for tuning in and checking out the Orient Kamasu with me. Let me know down in the comments, do you think that this model is worth the extra $100 when we're comparing it to the Orient Ray 2 or the Orient Mako for that matter? Do you think that this Orient Kamasu is overhyped? Also, do me a favor, don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, and if you're not subscribed to the channel, please do subscribe, and of course turn on notifications so you don't miss any more watch review videos. And with all that said, I'm going to go ahead and say thanks again, and bye now.